Welcome to the Dynasty Vipers Vipercast, where all things football are injected right to your veins, with your hosts, Matt Donnelly, Calvin Shoemake, and Jeff Mueller.
What is up? And welcome to a brand new edition of the Dynasty Vipers Team Spotlight Series. Today, we are going to be celebrating the 2020 NFL champion Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I was telling JB before the show, some of these are harder than others. As a Saints fan, that's hard for me to say, but I'm putting all that aside today. All my hoodad is out of the way for tonight only. And we'll talk about these Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And just as a recap for everybody on why, we're on I think show 24, 25 of these. And we've been recapping the offseason. And why is this important for Dynasty fantasy football? And we're the Dynasty Vipers. It's because we want to make sure that we don't just think about the rookies. Obviously, that's where everybody's attention turns at this time of year. And rightfully so. We need to get to know those guys. But we also need to know the teams that they're going to find themselves in. We need to understand the coaches, understand the coaching staffs. But what better way to do that than to bring on some really smart football people who also are fans of the team. Nobody knows your team the way you do. So to help me with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers today, we've got JB. JB, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, where we can find you, and just a little bit of what you're working on over the offseason.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on, man. It's awesome to be on with you. I appreciate any opportunity to talk Bucs, as any of my friends can tell you. I love talking about the Bucs. It's been a struggle for a while, but right now and this year, it's great. And I appreciate you having me on. You can find me on Twitter at FantasyCoachJB. I'm the co-host of the Fantasy Magnets podcast on the Fantasy Impact Today network. Also co-host the Fantasy Besties podcast on Monday night with a great group of people from the industry. I write for Razzball, so you can find me in several different places. Always try to stay pretty active on the Twitter machine, so you can definitely find me there. Always love engaging in conversations. Working on all different stuff in the offseason, really, just trying to get a grasp on the rookies and the incoming draft class, as everybody is at this point. And then, just starting to kind of dive into what kind of rankings we're going to be starting with for next year, because us crazy industry folk, we get right into draft season as soon as the previous season ends. So I'm already doing startup drafts and mock drafts and whatnot. So You know how we do it. We keep it rolling.
Yeah, I know. I need I think it was Fantasy Unicorn that we had on for the Arizona Cardinals, who's running 1,000 mock drafts. It seems like every day she's got one. And I'm like, yes, that is what I need, because I need to avoid being in way too many drafts and way too many real drafts. So that's my goal right now, is just don't join anything for the month of March. That's my goal.
There you go. And we got March Madness coming up, so that should keep us occupied for a little while. And then once that ends, and then it's all right, we got baseball starting, but hey, let's start getting into football, because that's where our focus is at.
Well, it looks like we had a special visitor there, but I'll let Matt. Are you joining us right here, or what are you doing? What's going on?
No, I'm just going to clean up the back images here. Apparently, I'm doing it from my cell phone, so I automatically jumped right into the stream.
Oops. Okay.
Oh, my cousin Dingus. Good to hear from you.
Any thoughts on the 2020 World Champions while you're here, Mr. Donnelly?
Oh, man, I got nothing on that. Both Brady and myself, we both know it was a tuck. It was a fumble, man. It was a fumble, and that's what started Brady's legacy. That's all I got to say.
All right, I'm pulling you off. Oh, nice. That was fun. Okay, so let's talk about the Bucs, because I mentioned it there. 2020 obviously could not have possibly gone better. It's you start off about this time last year, I guess Jameis Winston was still under contract and about to be finished. And then pretty big move, bring in the greatest of all time, and all he does is lead you to a championship. What was it like being a Buccaneers fan? What was your faith level like at that point when he was brought in? Like, were you on board? Did you not? Did you want Jameis back? Like, take us through what it was like going on in your mind as a fan of the team.
Yeah, I mean, it's been rough being a Bucs fan. As you know, we've had a lot of, really bad years and just really not being relevant, to be honest with you. Like we were the middle of the road type of team when we really had the players and we had, the ability to be better than that. But we just weren't winning close games. We didn't have good leadership. And I was a Jameis apologist for the longest time because I had to be. I had to defend my quarterback as everybody just ripped him to shreds. And I got tired of it, man. By last year, we got all these guys in place. We got studs on both sides of the ball, and we're just not getting it done. We're not finishing games. And that all stems from leadership. Like Jameis is a guy who wasn't a leader. He tried to be with his, pregame speeches and eating the W's and whatnot, but you saw the way the guys kind of looked at him while he was doing that. It's like, all right, this guy's kind of a clown, so they didn't really take it seriously. So when they had the opportunity to get Brady and then they actually landed Brady, I'll be honest with you, I didn't think he was going to come to Tampa. I thought he was going to go to like San Diego or something. Like I thought he was going back to Cali, and I didn't think he was actually going to come to Tampa. When that became a reality, I had really high hopes for this team. Because like I said, there were a lot of good pieces in place. And Tom Brady brings that leadership, that winning mentality. These guys, we had a guest on our Fantasy Magnets pod who was a beat writer for the Buccaneers. And he mentioned that, the Bucs needed somebody to look up to. They never had a proven winner that they could say, hey, I want to follow this guy. Jameis Winston wasn't that. Even a Mike Evans is a young guy who, he could be gung-ho, but it's like, all right, what has he done? Where, you get a guy like Tom Brady come in, it's like, wow, everybody knows. All these young guys on the team know this guy knows how to win. He's a champion. I want to do what he did. I want to follow in his footsteps. So let me see what he does and let me pick up things from him. And he really was motivating. I mean, the young secondary talked about it the whole offseason. Yes, it was a COVID offseason, it was a little bit weird. But once they started to practice it together and, they talked about how they learned so much just practicing against the Tom Brady. So, he had an effect on the entire team. So, I was pumped when I knew we would be able to get him because I knew that it would elevate the whole team to a level where they would certainly be a Super Bowl contender at least.
So what is it like? I from the outside looking in, again, like you think about the Buccaneers all the time. Like you said, at first it did seem like there was a little bit of problems with gelling. He had that famous I thought it was fourth down. He had that kind of famous thing. But you also hear stories where behind the scenes he doesn't let anybody accept anything but the best. And like the story about the guy crying in the NFC Championship, so happy that they won, and he's like, "What are you crying for? We haven't accomplished anything yet. We got another game to win." Yep. Like, is that what does it mean? Like, did you hear a lot of stories like that? Is that like a lot of behind the scenes stuff, or like, is there anything in particular about him that you noticed that just jumped out?
Absolutely. I mean, before the Super Bowl, he had a players only meeting, with just the players after the coaches had their meeting with them. And he just really motivated them. I don't remember. I think it was Mike Evans or one of the defensive players even that said, just the speech that he gave in that players only meeting was so uplifting and motivated that, they were ready to run through a wall for him, like, putting it all on the line and, giving it your best and leaving it all out there. One of those type of speeches where coming from a guy like Tom Brady that has Tom Brady's record behind him and all the rings that he has, it's like, all right, this guy knows what he's talking about. And the players all talked about that and talked about, what a leader he was. And like I said, that secondary, they've mentioned it all year long, how Tom Brady just made them better. And honestly, that young secondary was the question mark coming into the season. Somebody ranked them 32nd of 32 teams in secondaries in the league before the season started. So they had a chip on their shoulder from that. And then they got to practice against the greatest of all time, who just elevated them even more. And they talked about it all year, how much of a difference maker that was for them.
I believe that. And you're right. I mean, last year you wanted to start all of your quarterbacks against that Bucs defense. And it's not like there was a ton of personnel turnover. I mean, there were some young guys that clearly got better. But that defense was the biggest difference. Obviously, Tom Brady made a difference. But I guess And we're spending a lot of time on this, obviously, because it's the Bucs and they won the Super Bowl. But like, I guess, what do you just in your mind? What helped turn that defense around? Because more than anything, they held Pat Mahomes to no touchdowns on Super Bowl Sunday, and that's Tom Brady can he had a good game, but that defense really that's what brought home that Lamar.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, and a lot of it is a tip of the hat to what Todd Bowles did with that defense. Like I said, a lot of them were very young, so they were still learning Bowles' system last year, and they didn't have it all down. And guys took a big step forward. Guys like Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean in the secondary, those the two safeties. I mean, Antoine Winfield coming in as a rookie and playing like one of the best safeties in the league right off the bat. I mean, these guys really they played with this swagger to them. They played with a confidence that they didn't have last year. Specifically those two outside corners in Carlton Davis and Jamel Dean. They played timid last year. Sean Murphy-Bunting in the slot was like a guy that you would target. When you're setting DFS lineups, you're looking for the player who's going to go against Sean Murphy-Bunting. And in the second half of the season, he started playing with this confidence. And he even said it right out of the bye. He came out with this confidence and he started to play better. And he was huge in the playoffs for us. Made a couple of big picks in the playoffs. So these young guys were just playing with a swagger because I think what Todd Bowles did and what he allowed them to do kind of gave them that confidence and let them feel like they could play freely. Obviously, the guys up front, we knew the Bucs had one of the best front sevens in the league. So when you're getting pressure from Shaq Barrett, JPP, Vita Vea when he was healthy, Sue and those two great linebackers, when they're getting pressure, the quarterback's not having enough time to run through his reads. So, yeah, the corners don't have to cover for as long. You put that all together, that's a dominant defense right there. Yeah.
So now we'll turn the page a little bit, and I'll do that by referencing this quote from Bruce Arians that I love, man. He just seems like the kind of guy, you talk about a speech that makes you want to run through a wall. I feel like Bruce Arians probably has like 10 of those a season that he's able to give that makes you feel that way. He said, "Listen, I don't even consider us the defending champions going into next year." And what he went on to say is basically like, this is a brand new team. Like, that team is done. This is a brand new team now, and now we got to start from scratch, and we got to go earn everything going forward. And I'm like, yeah, that's the kind of coach you want to play for right there. That's going to say those kind of things, and you can't take anything for granted. And so, yeah, like that's the challenge now in front of the Buccaneers is, okay, you won the Super Bowl, like that was only like 3 weeks ago or something, but now it's like everybody can only think about 2021. And so to do that, first, are you going to have your quarterback? Most people think, yeah. Everybody says Tom Brady's coming back. Is there any doubt in your mind that he's back on the team under center next year?
Nah, no doubt at all. He's there. And I think that he'll be there more than next year. I think he wants to keep playing.
Yeah, the quote from Giselle was like, "Hey, what else do you have to prove?" And he's, he was basically like, "What else am I gonna do? Like, this is just
right.
Who I am." So yeah, I agree. There's really no chance of him not coming back. But it's when you see like what was surrounded with this year, he was surrounded by just a lot of great players, and there are a lot of holes to be filled when you just look at who they have for unrestricted free agents. So these are some big names here that I'm going to read, and we'll start Shaq Barrett. He's an unrestricted free agent. Levante David, unrestricted free agent. Ndamukong Suh, unrestricted free agent. You've got then on the offensive side, you've got Chris Godwin. You've got Rob Gronkowski. You've got and Antonio Brown. Maybe you want to keep him around. It seems like a good environment for him. And the Super Bowl playoff Lenny is an unrestricted free agent too. There's a lot of good players there. Yes, they're $24 million under the projected cap, but you're gonna have to spend some money, right? Like, what do you expect for them to do as far as bringing back the key pieces of this team to help bring home that title?
Yeah, it's scary when you list off all those big names and all guys who contributed to the Bucs being Super Bowl champions this year. So it's tough when you think about that. And, I was watching their victory boat parade that they did. And then afterwards they had like a little presentation where, they'd bring up a couple guys at a time and they would talk to the people that were there and to the reporters and whatnot. And they were just all fired up. Obviously they just, did a boat tour or whatever, and they were all a little fired up. So they're up and talking, and Levante David and Devin White were the first ones up. So Levante said, I love it here. I love it in Tampa. I hope to be back. I want to be back. And Bruce Arians came over and grabbed the mic and goes, you ain't going nowhere. and then he did the same thing when Godwin was up. He did the same thing when Sue was up. So, they want all these guys to come back. I don't know that it's logical that they all will. I think that the number one priority is going to be bringing Levante David back and making him a lifelong Buccaneer. Him and Devin White, in my opinion, are the best linebacker duo in the league. And I've been saying that for a couple years. Now, with Devin White taking that leap forward that he did this year and us getting national attention thanks to Tom Brady, now people starting to see it. So I think that's number one priority. I think Chris Godwin is like 1B. I think both of those are going to be the top priorities, and I think they'll find a way to bring them both back. Shaq Barrett's the one that I'm a little bit questionable about. I think that he can get a really nice payday, so I think he might go for that. I think he might end up opting to take the more money, where the Bucs will prioritize bringing back those other guys. I think Gronk and Antonio, if they're going to come back, they're going to come back to the Bucs. They want to play with Tom. Especially Gronk. Gronk doesn't want to play anywhere else. He's already retired once. So, he's just going to hang out in Florida and play with his best friend. And I think Antonio likes that situation too. I think he only wants to play with Tom. Fournette might go. Now, if you asked me before the playoffs, I'd say, he'll come back cheap. He won't be expensive to re-sign. But after playoff Lenny busted out, he might have earned himself one final payday. He might get that one more nice contract. So you can't fault him if he gets that offer somewhere and he takes it. But I think we'll be okay without him. If just looking forward a little bit, I think Ronald Jones, if healthy, is enough to be the every down back. But James White is also a free agent this year.
Oh, I'm so glad you mentioned that. That was one of the things I wanted. So let's go ahead and get into the running backs then, because how great of a fit would that be, right? I mean, he's a free agent. It makes perfect sense. Somebody just needs to go ahead and make it happen, because it's clear that's going to happen, right?
Yeah, and he won't be expensive. Tom Brady needs a pass-catching running back. He didn't have that this year. And he was very frustrated with all the drop passes that the running backs had this year. And you could see that frustration when he would throw a ball that bounced off one of their hands. He'd kind of do one of those. And, bringing in James White to reunite with him would just be too perfect. I mean, he's a free agent. He's not going to cost a lot. So bring him in as the role that Shady McCoy was supposed to have, that third down back, and, let him fill that role. And I think that would be a perfect fit.
Let's go ahead, since we're on running backs. Let's stay on that for a second, because let's switch and think about fantasy here. Let's assume James White is signed. That makes a pretty big difference for where you're going to take Ronald Jones in the draft, does it not?
Yes and no. I still think that if James White doesn't scare me enough that he would take a lot of volume from Ronald Jones. And what I've seen from Ronald Jones when healthy is that he can be a super explosive back. He could be a guy who's going to take, a handoff from the 20 and take it 80 yards for a touchdown. He's going to lose some passing down work to James White, but you're not drafting Ronald Jones to be a pass catcher to begin with. You never were. So I don't know that really affects him that much, to be honest with you, from where he was this year.
I think that's true. I guess what I worry about, and is I wouldn't even call it worry, because I think you're right. Ronald Jones showed more than I ever would have even come close to giving him credit for this year. He was tremendous at certain times. But Bruce Arians did find multiple reasons that seemed sort of head-scratching to take him off the field. And I hear what you're saying, but they're I think during the game against the Saints, didn't they have the least amount of rushing attempts in NFL history? I could see them just doing something where they're just all right, we don't run the ball anymore. We just throw the ball to James White.
Yeah. And they certainly can. And you mentioned Bruce Arians finding ways to take him off the field. That's a guy who has a very quick trigger and a very full doghouse. So you don't want to get there, because you never know how long you're going to end up there.
Yep. We got a question while we're on running backs here. Mike Valverde asked, what's the story for Keyshawn Vaughn? So obviously he was a draft pick last year, but didn't see much of the field. What do you think the diagnosis is, or what do you think for the future for him? Do you think there's anything there?
I don't know. And that's a good question, Mike, because, you would hope that they drafted him to come in and be a guy. I think part of the problem, Cal, was that, he had that COVID issue coming into the season. So when they were starting to get him, some touches in the preseason, like in the offseason, whatever, and kind of get him ramped up, he had a COVID issue, and it dragged on for a little while. It wasn't like one of those, I'll be back in 10 days thing. He was groggy and whatnot for a while. So he never really got up to speed. Then Ronald Jones took that step up this year. Like you mentioned, you saw some explosiveness out of him. So I think that there is a spot for Keyshawn Vaughn if they don't go out and sign a James White, if Fournette doesn't re-sign with the Bucs. If it's Ronald Jones and Keyshawn Vaughn and, some, Agumbawale type guy behind them, then there'll be a role for him, because Ronald Jones isn't going to carry the load 100%. So there can be a spot for him. I think it's going to depend on what the Bucs do in the offseason, because I don't think they're really sold on him, and I don't think that they're committed to him. They'll be okay with moving on, because they're looking right now. They're looking at a narrow window with Tom Brady, so they're not going to experiment with a young running back and see if maybe he's the future. They're thinking now. They're not thinking future right now. So.
Right. And he doesn't seem like the kind of coach that's interested in experimenting very much anyway, much less if he's got Tom Brady as his quarterback. And he likes those veterans. He likes to have guys in there that he trusts. But, obviously Chris Godwin is one of those guys and has been for a few years and could represent a pretty big hole. Do you think Chris Godwin ultimately gets pulled away by a gigantic contract from somebody, which could come, or do you think he ends up staying in-house?
I think he stays, and I think at worst they'll franchise tag him, because I think that they want to keep him around, and that's also something when you're looking, at the now and the future. I think Chris Godwin's a guy that you want to lock up long-term, and, let him and Mike Evans be a dominant 1-2 force for the next 4 or 5 years. Mike Evans is only 27 years old, so he's still got at least another good 4 years in him. So I think if you pair them together, you make sure you lock up Godwin for the long term. I think that's what they need to do. And I think, obviously a lot of people in the fantasy community love to speculate on where Godwin would be a great fit, because they want that excitement of somebody going to a new place. Mm-hmm. I think he stays put, but that just might be my wishful thinking too.
No, I think the good money is on that, and I think he's obviously got a good thing right in front of him. For fantasy, is that the best thing? If a dynasty owner has Chris Godwin, is that the best case scenario? Is him going back to Tampa Bay?
Best case scenario, no. Obviously, he's going to compete for targets in Tampa Bay. Obviously with Mike Evans, with the tight ends, Gronk scored 7 touchdowns. Cam Brate had a couple touchdowns. OJ Howard's going to be back, and he had a couple touchdowns. He had 2 in the 4 games he played. The running backs could, if you talk about a James White coming in, he could take some of those touchdown receptions. And then you got the Antonio Browns or the Scotty Millers or, the Tyler Johnsons that could take away a couple touchdowns. So, no, it's definitely not the best scenario for him. You want him to go to a place like Detroit that has no competition for targets, But that being said, you also want him catching passes from Tom Brady. You want him in an offense that, like you mentioned before, can go a game just chucking the rock the whole time and not handing the ball off. So, from a fantasy perspective, look, he was still wide receiver 38 this year in a PPR with the concussion in week 1, with the hammy in week 3, with the finger in week 7. He missed a lot of time, and he was still wide receiver 38. So even with the competition for targets, there's no doubt in my mind if he's healthy, he's a top 15 receiver.
Yeah. I feel like there was a time there where Mike Evans' name was brought up in terms of like the best wide receiver in the NFL. And it's like that disappeared. Like nobody talks about him when they ask like who's the best wide receiver in the NFL. Like nobody talks about him anymore. Why? This guy does nothing but produce incredible numbers every year, unless he's facing Marshawn Lattimore. But we won't talk about that. He produces incredible numbers, but like nobody talks about him like he's one of the best anymore.
Cal, I've been fighting this battle for as long as he's been in the league. At first, and I'm a Bucs fan that lives in New York. So you know how many years I had to argue with Giants fans about Mike Evans being better than Odell Beckham? and that everybody just loved Odell because he makes these one-handed catches and he's so exciting. And I'm like, but Mike Evans is better. Like, he's a better wide receiver. Like, it's not even a question. He's been a top 5 receiver in this league in my mind ever since he entered the league. But you're right. He doesn't get the respect. He doesn't get the respect that he deserves or that he's earned. I mean, the guy's had 7 straight years of over 1,000 yards receiving. It's frustrating for fantasy managers because he doesn't do it on a week in, week out basis. So it's frustrating when you start him that week that he goes 3 for 36 and doesn't score a touchdown. But then the following week, when he gets 120 yards and 2 touchdowns, you love having him on your team. So he's frustrating in the fantasy world, short term, game by game. But at the end of the day, you're getting a guy who's getting you 1,000 yards and 13 touchdowns, 12 touchdowns.
Right. Yeah, that's the thing is and that's part of what makes it so tough, right? Because you got Mike Evans, you got Chris Godwin, and potentially you've got Antonio Brown back. We've mentioned a lot of other mouths to feed, and Gronk, maybe OJ Howard. They'll probably bring back one of OJ Howard and Cameron Brate, right? Like, they probably don't bring back both.
I think they might look to trade Brate, as valuable as he's been. I think they'll save some money, and they need to with the salary cap and all the guys they need to re-sign. So they might look to move Brate. But you look at that as like, it's kind of risky because look at what happened this year. OJ Howard goes down in week 4, and then you needed Brate and Gronk there together. So never know. And
then, you got your targets out of the backfield. But then you mentioned Scotty Miller showed a lot of great things this year, looked really talented. And Tyler Johnson's one of my favorites. Like, I loved him coming out of college and I thought he would fit perfectly. And you saw it a couple times, like 3rd down, Tom Brady was looking his way. He seemed to earn some trust like pretty quickly. But is there room for a guy like that to break out?
Not if everybody else returns. I think that, if you're looking at it from a dynasty perspective, you want Tyler Johnson. You want to go out and grab him now before he has that breakout. Because like you mentioned, he's made some big plays. He showed great hands, and he was excellent coming out of college. I loved that pick. I loved him coming over to Tampa because I watched him in Minnesota, and he was great there. So I think he's a guy that when there's no Antonio Brown, or if there's no Chris Godwin, then absolutely he's going to break out because he's shown that he's able to. But I think next year, if all 3 of the main 3 receivers come back, pump the brakes. The breakout will be the following year because, Antonio's not going to play forever. So dynasty-wise, I want to grab as many shares of him as I can right now for sure because he's going to be a star in this league.
Totally, 100%. I love him. I love his talent. I hope he at some point gets that opportunity. If those guys do really via free agency, he could be a 2021 breakout. We'll see. If things go the way the Bucs want, I think they probably spend most of their energy and attention bringing back the pieces that help bring them to the championship this year. And like I said, with the cap room and the amount of people that they have to bring back in, they got their work cut out for them just to do that. We're not far away from free agency happening. Is there anybody like on your wish list that you'd like this team to bring in?
You know what? I've been mostly focused on them, keeping the band together, bringing back those guys. And, people were talking about, wouldn't it be great to get J.J. Watt in that rotation on the defensive line too? And as much as you like a splash signing like that, you look at what these guys built this year and the camaraderie that they have together, the understanding of not only the system, but understanding where each other's going to be. I'm sure these guys, Ndamukong Suh could look over at JPP and just give them a certain look, and they know what they're going to do. You know what I mean? So, bringing in a new guy can kind of just throw that all off, even if it is somebody, of a JJ Watt type of standard. Obviously, we know it's not him now, but
right.
I don't know that I want a big splash signing, to be honest with you. I'd be happy with maybe an upgrade at edge, as a rotational edge rusher, especially if we lose Shaq Barrett. That's going to be a priority that I think that the Bucs will either address in free agency or in the draft. So I don't think that there's a lot of holes. Right now it's just rotational pieces that can give some depth that I would be looking for them to do. Nothing of a splash.
Yeah, I think that's probably smart. Like based on what they have now, they've shown they'll be aggressive. So if it seems like somebody is falling through the cracks and they can get a 1-year deal on them, they brought in Antonio Brown, they brought in Leonard Fournette. Like they certainly will be aggressive if they feel like they can bring somebody in, even if you think that position's covered. If you think like, these guys have plenty of wide receivers, they'll still bring in a Hall of Fame wide receiver. So it's they're not holding back, and you gotta love that as a fan, no doubt. As a fantasy owner, it can be tough, like you said, like the week-to-week stuff. But they are going to make an addition through the draft. And I know you said you've been doing some homework on these prospects, and and all. Like, so do you have your eye on a particular guy that you would like for them to draft, or maybe it's first round, maybe it's some for the later rounds? But is there anybody that you kind of hope that they bring in that seems like a Bucks guy?
So, yeah, I guess it kind of depends on who they re-sign. But I've seen a mock and you've seen the trend of running backs falling and not getting drafted in the first round lately in the NFL draft. I saw a mock recently where no running back was selected in the first round until that pick 32, where both Najee Harris and Travis Etienne were sitting there. Ooh. And it had the Bucks taking Etienne there, who can be a pass catching back, who can, kind of develop into an every down back, really. So that would be kind of spicy, and that would kind of kill everything that we said about Rojo. Not right off the bat. Obviously, it would take some time, and they would probably share the workload at first. But, I mean, that would be pretty cool to have a foundational running back. We haven't had one of those in a while. But then also an edge rusher. I mean, if we lose Shaq Barrett, which I think is likely, there's a couple of good edge rushers that could fall to that pick 32 at the end of the first round. So, I mean, I think that there's a good possibility of getting, the guy from Georgia, whose name I'm not even going to pronounce, or the Penn State, Jason Owe. Like, I feel like, those type of edge rushers will be there at the 32 pick. And I think that if we lose Shaq Barrett, that'll be the way that they should go.
Yeah, so Munter Difflin is joining us. We did talk a good bit about James White, and yes, I think that's the match made in heaven. Like, it's almost like it would be just like Carson Wentz rejoining with Frank Reich. That just made perfect sense. Like, you knew him. Like, yes, it's got to end up going that way. James White ended up at Tampa Bay. Like, that just has to happen. We just have to find out a way to get them back together. And James White may not be what he was with Tom Brady, but gosh, I mean, he seems like the kind of guy that, like, you just put him in that pass catching role, and a head coach that had David Johnson on his team, man, that seems like that could be a lot of good magic to happen right there.
It's just the reliability. I mean, Tom can throw it to James White with his eyes closed and know where they're going to be. They have that connection already. He didn't have that this year with any of his running backs catching passes out of the backfield. It is a match made in heaven, like you said. I think that's, and they'll get him cheap. He's not going to be expensive after, not a great year. So I think that's definitely going to be a priority. And we talked about, who the Bucks would go after in free agency, and it not being a big splash name. It's going to be little pieces like a James White as a third down back or a rotational piece on the defense. That's exactly what it's going to be. That's exactly what we were thinking.
One more rude comment from Mike Valverde. How can a receiver be regarded as the best when Mike Evans drops the ball as many times as he does? Come on, Mike.
I had this argument with the besties in our group chat, and actually I had it with John Frisella too, one of my friends at Legend Sports, and he was talking about the two passes in the Green Bay game that one of them tipped off his hands and ended up as an interception, and one of them, they weren't good balls. I mean, yes, he's a tall guy. So when he's a big receiver, has to go up full extension, still barely hits off his fingertips. Yes, they say if it hit your hands, you should catch it, right? But, I don't knock him for the drops. A lot of his drops are not easy catches. He's not dropping passes in his hands like Deontay Johnson.
Why does Lattimore get to him? Why does he let Marcus? Because Marcus Lattimore goes up and down. Like, obviously, I've watched him a lot, and sometimes he can just get destroyed by Adam Thielen or somebody, or not even as good as Adam Thielen, and then he just shuts Mike Evans down. It just seems, I don't know how he does it.
I don't know either. He's in Mike Evans' head. Like he is just in his head now. It goes back years. They've had shoving matches before, obviously the play with Jameis on the sideline and Mike Evans coming in and chucking him from behind. But, they go at it. And I think that when they match up, it brings the best out of Lattimore because Lattimore wants to continue that dominance over him. So you're going to get the best Marshawn Lattimore the 2 times or 3 times even that you see the Saints match up against the Bucs. And he doesn't play to that level unless he's matched up with Mike Evans. Mike Evans kind of worries too much about Lattimore and pushing on him and getting a little piece of him on his way off of a break that it kind of throws him off of his game. So I think that Lattimore is in his head, just like Carlton Davis is in Michael Thomas's head and kind of owns him now.
Exactly. Gosh, a lot of things going on in Michael Thomas's head. I'm not sure.
Poor slant boy.
Yeah, one of them is his own teammate, right? Like he can't even get along with his teammates. But I hope he'll have a bounce back. There's 2 other players that I want to ask you about that you're going to be really familiar with. And feel free, interject anything. Like anything else you want to say about your Bucs, obviously you can. But I want to ask you about 2 quarterbacks that you're really familiar with that find themselves as unrestricted free agents. We've mentioned him a couple times. The first one here is Jameis Winston. Like, what's the right environment and situation for him to find himself in, for him to have success? He's still young, and he's had great seasons if you just don't look at the interceptions.
Yeah, and I've had to fight for him for years, like I mentioned. So, I do have a little soft spot for Jameis still, as annoying as he can be. But I think he's a capable quarterback. I don't think he's a terrible quarterback. I think he's a guy who can be a starting quarterback in this league. I thought a perfect landing spot would have been Pittsburgh for him. I think that, as a heir apparent to Ben, now being next year, most likely, I think that would be a good landing spot for him. But I think he wants to start. And honestly, I was having this conversation with the besties the other day. I think he should be the starting quarterback for the Saints next year. Now, obviously, they have all the money tied up into Taysom Hill and salary cap issues themselves. So, with Jameis firing his agent, he's probably looking for more money. And I don't know that the Saints will be able to afford him with the money that they're guaranteeing to Taysom. But I think he should be the starting quarterback in New Orleans. He knows the system now. He's had a year to kind of learn under Drew Brees and Sean Payton and kind of learn their system and their playbook. So I think he'd slide in seamlessly as a good starting quarterback for you guys. Definitely a better option than Taysom Hill. I mean, I just don't believe that Taysom Hill is a starting quarterback in this league. I think they tried it. I don't think the experiment went as they wanted it to. And now I think they're going, oh, man, we overpaid this guy. And I called him Taysom Tebow the other day. Like, I think he's a rich man's Tim Tebow. I don't think that he's a gimmick quarterback. And I don't think you could win a Super Bowl with him as your quarterback. So, sign Jameis as your starting quarterback. Spend the money on Taysom Hill that you did and make him your starting tight end now that you're cutting all your tight ends.
Okay, so remember that you defended Jameis Winston for a long time when I say this. Okay, so remember you were that guy. I am the biggest Taysom Hill guy, and part of it is that I don't think they can afford to sign anyone else. Like you said salary cap issues. Like, it doesn't even begin to describe what they have going on. Like, we'd have to cut everyone just to bring in Jameis or anybody else. And it just wouldn't be worth any of their time to do so. Sean Payton loves Taysom Hill. He just always has. And I will say, in his defense, out of every player that threw 100 passes last year, you know who had the highest completion percentage?
What was the average depth to target?
That's right, Leonard Difflin. Died on that Taysom Hill. So yeah, I do think you're right. I think being attached to a brilliant offensive mind like Sean Payton would be good for him. I kind of think it'd be fun to see him with Riverboat Ron in Washington, like that. In Washington, that seemed like it would be really cool.
Yeah.
The other one I want to ask you about is Ryan Fitzpatrick, because he also finds himself as an unrestricted free agent, and you watched him right there in Tampa. Like, what would be a good fit for him? How do you, is he ready to be just a backup? Is he just, going to be a bridge somewhere? Or Does he get like a starting job and have a chance to kind of just be the guy?
I don't know. I think he should have that chance, but as a bridge quarterback. You know what I mean? I think that, a perfect landing spot would be in New England. You let him play in New England. Maybe they draft a Mac Jones, in the middle of the first round this year, let him develop a couple of years, a year or two under Fitz, let Fitz kind of run the offense for a year or two. I think he still has something in the tank. Obviously, we've seen it. Every year we think, all right, this guy's old. He's got a big beard. He's an old man. But he comes out there and he chucks the rock, man. He can still chuck it. So, and he's fun. He's exciting. Yeah, so exactly. He sells tickets. So if you're looking at a New England team who lost Tom Brady, who went out there and didn't do much this year, you got some frustrated fans there. You bring in a personality like Fitz, and you get that Fitz magic going back in New England. It's going to bring some more excitement back there. So I think that would be a great fit for him. And, Linda might kill me for saying this, but I think Denver's a good fit for him too, with the question marks that they have with Drew Lock and not knowing if he's the guy or not. Bring a guy like Fitz there to be a mentor to him and maybe make him that better quarterback that you hope he can be, or B, be that fullback option if, you go a couple games and Lock's not the guy.
I totally agree, and he actually did come up on the Denver show with Linda and Nate. We talked about it, and we brought him up as a good option. And you're right, he could be a good mentor. A really underrated signing last year was Case Keenum being signed by the Browns, and I think that made a difference on Baker Mayfield and what he was able to do. Obviously, Stefanski coming in with Keenum knowing the system and things like that. That was a big help. And Fitzpatrick can be a guy like that. I'd be curious to see where it goes. I hope he gets a chance because he's fun for fantasy and he's good for fantasy options. So I hope he gets an opportunity somewhere. What about last thing? Any rookies that you've been looking at that you're just excited to talk about? You're in your study. You think they're prime for whatever reason they jumped out as your favorite?
I mean, it depends on landing spots, obviously, but I think that after what we saw last year from the rookie wide receiver class, I think it's going to be a fun act to follow for this year's class. You got some really big names coming out, Jamar Chase, Devonta Smith, you even consider Jalen Waddle or you consider Kyle Pitts kind of like a wide receiver, even though he's a tight end, right? So you got some really exciting pass catchers coming out this year. I really want to see where Kyle Pitts lands. I think if he ends up in, a landing spot like Carolina with the 8th pick, that's a match made in heaven because they haven't had a tight end to throw the ball to, regardless of who the quarterback's going to be there. It just adds another dimension to that offense. Obviously, as a Saints fan and a Bucs fan, we don't want to see it. Right. But I think that's a great landing spot for him. And I'm interested to see where he lands because, obviously fantasy Twitter has been very high on him and just loves to talk about him. So I think, between his landing spots and some of those wide receivers, you're looking at some mocks that have, a guy like Waddle going to the Giants and giving Daniel Jones another option with Saquon coming back. I think, some of those could be great fits for those rookie wide receivers. And we could kind of see a little bit of what we saw last year with the rookie wide receiver class.
I think Cincinnati would be fun for Pitts. But my dream scenario there is
offensive line. They need O-line.
I hope they go I hope they shore up their offensive line in free agency and then just go Jamar Chase, just get Burrow and Chase back together. That'd be fun.
That would be fun. That would be fun. It would hurt my T. Higgins shares a little bit, but I'd be okay with it.
Yeah. Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on. That was a lot of fun. Get a chance to talk about the Bucs and talk about you clearly are, you know the team very well, football very well, very informative. Appreciate everything. What you got?
I like big bucks, and I cannot lie.
Oh, nice.
No, and just real quick before we sign off, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention what the difference Ryan Suckup made for the Buccaneers team this year. I mean, we've had kicking woes for years. We had the Roberto Aguayo curse on us for years. Suckup went 28 for 31 in field goals. Plus, Linda will appreciate me talking about kickers a little bit, right. But Ryan Suckup's really been a difference maker and just having that reliability in the kicking game. So that was a big boost too. And I didn't get a chance to mention him before, so I got to just kind of sprinkle that in real quick.
No, that's right. That's a really good point. kickers are the kind of thing that like you can take for granted, but if you don't have a good one, you notice it, and it sticks out, and it can just kill you. Change the momentum of a game. You're right.
For the past few years, man, we've lost games because of field goal kicking, because of missed extra points and missed field goals. So to have somebody reliable, it made a difference.
We've got to tag Linda in this show now. She's got to be tagged.
Absolutely, man. This is awesome.
Tell everybody where they can find you and just like how they can support you over the course of this offseason and all the hard work that you're doing.
Absolutely, man. You can find me on Twitter at FantasyCoachJB. You can find me Monday nights on the Fantasy Besties live pod, usually around 7:15, depending on when we kind of get our clown show together. Fantasy Magnets podcast. We've taken a little bit of a hiatus right now, but we'll be back and better than ever. You can find my articles on Razzball next year. My man, Petey, in the house. Petey, you can find me in all the group chats that we got going on Twitter. And all of you guys, man, always feel free to reach out to me, Bucks-related, fantasy-related, whatever. Love talking with everybody. I don't know if you got on this Clubhouse thing now all of a sudden, Cal. It's awesome. All day.
Like 2 days ago. Yeah.
It's cool. I'm an outside salesman, so like I'm in my car most of the day. So I'll be driving and like a Clubhouse will pop up and let me open it up, see what these guys are talking about. So it's really cool. I love talking sports. I love listening, to different people's perspectives. Always love interacting, meeting new people. So definitely hit me up at Fantasy Coach JB. I always follow back. I'm not a ratio watcher. So, if you're not following me already, shoot me a follow. Love to talk with you guys.
That's awesome. I really appreciate your time. Appreciate your insight. Like that was really cool. And I think anybody listening learned a lot about the Bucks and would be smarter for having paid attention. So for JB, I am at Calvin and Hobby. You can find me on Twitter there as well. Make sure you guys are locked into our YouTube. We have a lot of amazing guests on that we haven't announced yet, but you can also go back and listen to and watch Matt Donnelly's interview with Peter Schrager from this week. That was really awesome. We also spoke with Scott Bogman, which was a personal favorite of mine. I've been listening to In This League for a long time. Love those guys. And we got a lot of cool shows in the back catalog, a lot of them coming up. Hit that subscribe button, get the notifications so you don't miss out on anything. And for JB, for Matt Donnelly, the rest of the Dynasty Viper gang, we'll see you guys at the